What do we do with this parable? It's called the parable of the wicked tenants. And certainly these are wicked people. They're doing evil to this vineyard owner's servants and emissaries. And then they kill his son. Sound familiar? And even so, when the vineyard owner returns, the parable ends with Jesus asking them a question. It's not what you would think. He asks them a question instead of putting up an actual suggestion for what to do with these tenants. For Matthew Capon, in his book about the kingdom parables, he notes, and this is something that you'll know if you're very familiar with the gospel scriptures, that this parable is listed in all three of the synoptic gospels. Listed in all three, common to all three. However, not taught a lot, because it's difficult to understand, and it might be for some a tough pill to swallow. He notes that Matthew's version, the version we have today, is the unabridged version. So if you look at them in Mark and Luke, you'll see that this parable is shorter, a little more condensed, but Matthew's version is the fuller, more sense of the story. And the point is that we, I suppose, have to have compassion for that vineyard owner. This synoptic parable is important. That's when it's all in all three, it holds significance for us. So we wonder, why it's not taught much, why we're not as familiar with the felt board from Sunday school with the parable of the wicked tenants. Well, it's violent. It's angry. The tenants are so conniving and cruel, and they're in cahoots together to thwart the vineyard owner. And obviously, when we get to the end of the parable, the passage for today, which includes the parable but is not limited to the parable, tells us that the Judean authorities, which depends on which gospel you're reading, the chief priests, scribes, and Pharisees, the Judean authorities, got mad at Jesus for telling this parable because they saw themselves in it. So in this parable, it's a kingdom parable. God owns the vineyard. God has placed the vineyard in Israel. And when it came time for the harvest, God sent the prophets. The prophets of old, minor and major, the prophets came. And those are like those emissaries that are listed in the parable. The prophets, subsequently beaten, stoned, and killed, right? You think about Elijah after he defeated the 450 prophets of Baal, going into hiding and crying out to the Lord. They seek my life. I have to hide. And then he hides in the rock, and the earth, the wind, and the earthquake, the wind, and the fire come, but God is in the still small voice. The prophets were treated like the first group of servants and emissaries that the vineyard owner sends to the tenants. The tenants rejected them. So what does the vineyard owner do? He sends his only son, the heir to the throne. And what do the tenants do? They kill him also. See the parallel there? This parable is, well, it hits home. God sends God's only son, and they kill him too. I wonder about the motivation of the tenants, entrusted with the land, to cultivate it, to do what's right by it. Why don't they share the profit with the vineyard owner? Could it be perhaps that they haven't done a good job? They don't have enough to show for their labors to the one who owns it all? I think this parable should be taught in Sunday school. I think it should be brought forth because we can all play a part in being those tenants. Yes, it functions in the gospel lesson as a story for the Judean authorities, like I said before, the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees and all those other people that are coming against Jesus to question and test him. They're the tenants. But somehow, in our day and age, we are too. And the question we need to ask ourselves when we read this parable is, how have we mistreated the vineyard owner's servants that have visited us? When people bring a message to us that we don't like, that'll cause us to change our behavior and be less selfish, we reject it. Well, I do. I can't speak for you. We reject a message from God and God's messengers because it does not serve our own selfish purposes. For me, it's a message from a trusted colleague to let go of some anger, some resentment. By the way, resentment is drinking poison and expecting the other person to die or get sick. Doesn't serve me at all. And I thought, well, you know what? That person's gone to meddling. I reject that. And then the house of cards started to fall down. And I realized that she was right. She was right. And I had to go back with my tail between my legs and say, you know what? Can we reconcile? Because I could really use your messages from God to me. Of course, when God's grace is in your heart, you do that. You say, sure. Because the selfishness is what gets offended and affronted, and I'm never going to speak to you again kind of thing. But when we're not in that place, we can, number one, be those messengers for God, and number two, receive those messages from God to make our lives better. And we all experience the consequences that we have received because of what we have done. It's our own doing that causes these house of cards that we built to fall. And so, like those wicked tenants, rejecting God's message, we reject the goodness and wholeness. We reject the very owner of the vineyard in which we have been appointed and entrusted and trusted with dominion. We reject the criticism that we get when we are told that we're not doing a good job with what God has entrusted to us. But there's grace, right? The tenants may have killed the vineyard owner's son, but as he was dying, he asked for their forgiveness. And friends, that means there's forgiveness for you and for me. It is available to us. I hope that on this World Communion Sunday, you will experience an encounter with the living Lord, and that there will be a messenger, an emissary, a servant of God who calls you to a better way, to put down wickedness and opt for goodness. May God bless you.